You're ugly!
Spyro the Dragon is a classic PlayStation title. It's a great concept of a game with a simple and straightforward story. Most PS1 titles had very simplistic storylines and were only used to move the main character to the next section of the game, and it was fine as long as it made sense to the player. So, of course, not a lot of backstory or forethought is put into certain characters. One of those characters is Gnasty Gnorc, the main villain of the game. Very little is known about Gnasty and how he became such a villain to the dragons. So today, I'm going to take everything that we know from the classic trilogy, fill in some of the unexplained gaps with educated extrapolation, and make a solid foundation that explains Gnasty Gnorc's origins. But in order to do that, let's start with what we actually know about Gnasty Gnorc.
I'll take that question. Gnasty Gnorc is a simple creature.
Simple?
He has been contained in a remote world and is no threat to the Dragon Kingdom.
No threat!
Besides, he is ugly.
Ugly? That does it!
This is literally the only cinematic that involves Gnasty Gnorc. We then see him one more time when we go to fight him, and that's it. No speech, no cinematics, no explanations. In fact, in the original game, he only says 7 words in grand total. That's less words than Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back. So how do we extract any sort of information or anything? Well, Lindar does do some explaining in the interview. Lindar describes Gnasty Gnorc as a simple creature who's been contained outside of the Dragon Kingdom. He's no longer considered as a threat and that he is ugly. So, at one point, Gnasty Gnorc seemingly lived within the Dragon Realms and was a threat to the dragons, and then was banished and placed on the outer reaches of the Dragon Kingdom. Okay, so that's something. Additionally, this line of questioning was started when the interviewer asked what Aster's thoughts were when it was discovered that Gnasty Gnorc found a spell that turned gems into Nork warriors, meaning that Gnasty Gnorc was doing some kind of research. I then decided to open up the original Spyro 1 manual and see if there was a bit more of an explanation for, well, anything. And actually, there was, quote, "In the beginning, the 5 dragon families lived in their 5 dragon worlds in harmony. Their lives were happy and peaceful until the day a Gnorc broke the rules. Gnasty Gnorc was an unpleasant creature from the bottom of his dirty boots to the top of his unwashed head. He wasn't pretty, and his personality combined the short temper of a gnome and the bad attitude of an orc. Gnasty resented the happy dragon families. More than anything, he detested their beautiful shiny jewels, which were not only nice to look at, but showed him reflections of his own ugly mug every time he did so. Gnasty became such a problem that he was banished to the dragon junkyard. This was a world that the dragons weren't fond of, though it suited Gnasty just fine. He renamed it Gnasty's World as soon as he got there. Gnasty began to fool around with magic spells. After a while, he hit on the 2 he wanted: a giant spell to trap all the dragons in crystal, and a potion to animate those radiant gems and turn them into Gnorc soldiers. We are starting to get a bit more of a clearer picture as to what exactly happened with Gnasty and his origins. But before we get to our recreation, there's a couple of details that I want to inject. Remember how it was mentioned that Gnasty Gnorc learned a spell that turned gems into Gnorc warriors? Well, when you beat one of Gnasty's creatures, they turn back into the type of gem that was used to create them. The value of that said gem determines the power of the creature. So, these basic Gnorcs, for example, are small, scared, and practically useless. So when they're defeated, they drop a green gem. But as you face tougher enemies, the value of the gems that was used to create them increases. And in some cases, they may even hold multiple gems at a time, especially if they are a boss. but pay attention to when you defeat Gnasty Gnorc. As Spyro delivers the last fire breath, Gnasty turns back into multiple gems. Wait, I thought Gnasty was the one that turned warriors into gems. How could he be made of gems himself? Additionally, there are some natural creatures that live in the dragon realms that likely have little to no ties to Gnasty Gnorc, like these warthogs. We can even see one of them kill a Gnorc without even thinking twice. Obviously, there are no allegiances, but when you defeat the warthogs, they also drop gems. Alright, so this is where we stop the video, say nothing matters, and move on. But shockingly, there is a potential explanation. From the manual, there are two dragon clans I think that you should know a bit more about, especially this one, the Beastmakers. Here is the manual's explanation of this clan. These dragons are responsible for bringing forth all new species of creatures living in the world. They choose to live in swamps and tumble down wood platforms, on stilts in the mudflats, and in hollowed out trees in the thick forests. Here, they can find natural clay, roots, and other materials to do their work. Wait, so Beastmakers literally bring forth new species of creatures to the dragon realms? In that case, it would be safe to assume that they made the humble warthog and other animals as well, as Beastmakers is adorned with a number of warthog statues, but they drop gems when you defeat them, even though they were made by the Beastmakers beforehand and are not a part of Gnasty's army. Things are starting to make sense now, believe it or not. The other dragon clan I want you to focus on is the Magic Crafters. According to the manual, dragons of this family spend their time making magic artifacts used by all the dragons throughout the rest of the worlds. They are shy around other creatures and like to be alone. They can be very happy in their remote mountaintops, ice cliffs, and caves, studying their craft in peace. Additionally, the original Spyro the Dragon website also expands on this by saying that they not only study and make magic artifacts, but spells as well. Essentially, if you're looking to cast a spell or get a magic artifact to help you cast spells, then you would have to speak with a magic crafter to do so. There's one more detail that we have to break down real quick. When Spyro 1 opens, Aster tells us and the interviewer how well off the dragon clans have been, letting the interviewers know how much treasure they have.
We now have 12,000 treasure, or is it 14,000?
Now, this is important because he can't quite remember how much treasure they have, whether it's 12,000 or 14,000. So when you beat the game, if you collected everything, you will have 12,000 treasure. However, once you also save all the dragons, you are granted access to Gnasty's loot, which gives an additional 2,000 treasure, totaling to 14,000. Aster is older and he's getting mixed up with what they had versus what they have now. This kind of implies that Gnasty somehow stole 2,000 treasure before he turned the dragons into crystal. Okay, so when we take everything that we know, combine it together, and then make a couple of educated extrapolations, I think this is potentially Gnasty Gnorc's origins. Many years ago, the dragons from the 5 clans lived in peace in the Dragon Realms. One of those clans, the Beastmakers, were responsible for bringing forward new life in the Dragon Realms. Beastmakers had the understanding that the treasure they coveted also contained some kind of life magic that allowed them to turn their statues of sticks and mud into life itself. They also knew that the more powerful the gem was, the more powerful the creature would be. One day, they decided to create an incredibly powerful creature by combining 4 of their largest valued gems together. They created a large, hulking creature. Now, it is unclear if the Beastmakers created the Gnorc species as a whole, and Gnasty Gnorc was just one of their ultimate creations, or if Gnasty Gnorc was the only Gnorc that they made. For now, we are going to assume that Gnasty Gnorc was the only one that they made. The dragons were thoroughly impressed, but this creature was, well, short-tempered and ugly. The dragons decided to combine the words gnome and orc together and call it a Gnorc. As time went on, this Gnorc grew angrier and angrier at the dragons. He hated that they called him ugly, but what he hated the most was their beautiful array of gems. The gems were a constant reminder to the Gnorc, showing how ugly he looked, as he could see his own reflection in their refractive beauty. Finally, this Gnorc one day snapped and devised a plan to defeat the dragons once and for all. As time went on, the dragons noticed this new Gnorc creature started to become an issue for them. He would be constantly aggressive, cause them problems, and be a downright nuisance.
That's not a gem!
Also, he was dirty, smelly, and just downright nasty, which in lies the creation of his name, Gnasty Gnorc. While the dragons deliberated what to do, Gnasty was putting his plan into action. He spied and studied the beast makers and how they created life, but he also somehow snuck into the magic crafters world and stole a number of books and magical artifacts. Then he started to raid the dragon's treasure hoard. The dragons by this point had enough of Gnasty Gnorc's antics, and they banished him to the dragon junkyard, a smelly world that they weren't fond of. They thought that the world was perfectly fit for Gnasty Gnorc, and he couldn't agree more. In solitude, Gnasty fiddled with the ancient artifacts from the magic crafters, trying to figure out how to harness magic. Eventually, he was able to create an enchanted club that allowed him to cast spells. He experimented with the 2,000 gems that he stole and eventually was able to create life like the beast makers. And so he created his Gnorc army. Additionally, he was able to figure out how to turn dragons into crystal, putting them in a stasis and allowing his army to take over the dragon realms with ease. One day, however, Gnasty Gnorc was watching TV when suddenly an interview with the dragons began. Out of morbid curiosity, he kept watching to see what they had to say. Lindar interrupts the interviewer questioning Astor to answer a question about Gnasty Gnorc, saying that he was a simple creature and that he was no threat, and most of all, he was ugly. This, of course, made Gnasty Gnorc snap, and he decided at that moment that it was time to launch his full-scale invasion on the dragon realms. He cast his crude but effective spell and turned all the dragons into crystal. All but one, of course.
Looks like I've got some things to do.
I want to clarify though, this is not a definitive canon explanation. I'm simply taking the rules that were set in the world and filling in the gaps in between with extrapolations of these said rules. I actually did the exact same thing with this video, where I found a plot hole that makes Spyro's existence no longer make sense, but how a Spyro 4 title could be based around correcting this unexplained loop and plot hole. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye!